Get those trade machines firing. What's up? This is EJ Stewart, joined by Tommy Beer. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, and Audacy WFAN original. We got a lot to get to on this episode. So Giannis Antetokounmpo putting the Milwaukee Bucks feet to the fire, and it could be the Knicks that could pick up the pieces there. So we'll talk about what that means. We'll also talk about the World Cup. We got RJ Barrett shining for Canada, Brunson and Hart playing well for Team USA. So we give you guys the latest on that. And with Madison Square Garden, when you're dealing with a James Dolan franchise, there's all these political battles that at times actually do impact the New York Knicks. So MSG got a lease renewal. It was not a long-term lease renewal, which I think surprised some people. So we'll break that down as well. So all of that coming at you right after this.
If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Like I said, my guy Tommy Beer joins me as always. Tommy, good to have you back in the podcast. Hope you enjoyed a wonderful vacation. How you feeling?
Feeling good. Although a vacation with kids requires a vacation when you return. Yeah, kids had a good time. We were up in the Poconos, and sounds like there was a little bit of some surprising quotes coming out of Milwaukee. What do you got for us, EJ?
Yeah, this was a surprise indeed. So again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, and Audacy WFAN original. It's a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Be sure to hit the auto download feature on your streaming service. Get these episodes every time we drop. Also, remember to rate and review the podcast. And if you want to watch the video versions, you can catch us on YouTube on the WFAN channel. So, what is going on with Giannis Antetokounmpo? So, as one New York Times interview and a report from Mark Steins now has fans wondering whether Giannis is eyeing the Big Apple. So, according to Mark Stein, quote, the Lakers and the Knicks are already being mentioned as franchises presumed to interest Giannis Antetokounmpo down the road if he does decide to move on from Milwaukee, end quote. He adds that, quote, the Bucks just made a slew of moves re-signing Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, replacing Mike Budenholzer as coach with Adrian Griffin to try to appease the face of its franchise. Now, this report came after Giannis, who is set to become a free agent in 2025, did an interview with the New York Times where he seemed to put pressure on the Milwaukee Bucks to do whatever it takes to build a championship team. He said signing an extension this summer, about signing an extension next summer, because he said this summer it wouldn't make sense given the money that he would be passing up if he signed an extension this season. But talking about next summer, he said, I would not be the best version of myself if I don't know that everybody's on the same page. Everybody's going for a championship. Everybody's going to sacrifice time away from their family like I do. If I don't feel that, I'm not signing. So pretty direct words from Giannis Antetokounmpo. He added, quote, at the end of the day, being a winner, it's overall, that's the goal. Winning a championship comes first. I don't want to be 20 years on the same team and don't win another championship. So you got Giannis saying, I know all that stuff I've said about wanting to stay on one team is true, but I'm not doing that at the expense of winning championships, and basically saying that I'm not signing an extension until the Bucks show me that they're ready to win a NBA title again. So, A, how realistic do you believe it is that Milwaukee could lose Giannis and Giannis could actually end up leaving? And B, how realistic do you think it is for the Knicks to be in this picture if indeed Giannis decides to leave?
Yeah, EJ. I mean, I was on vacation, as you mentioned. I was on vacation, so I just kind of saw the blurbs on Twitter, scrolling through my phone, over the weekend. Didn't really think too much of it. There's those aggregator bots that put together stuff and make it seem like every star player is on the move every other day.
Yep.
But I got back and then sat down and read the interview and was surprised. Genuinely surprised at how strong his comments were. I mean, I don't want to call it a threat. But it was putting a team on notice, essentially saying, you guys know I'm loyal. You guys know I love you. You know what I'm about as a human being. and nobody can question Giannis's character and just one of the best people on the planet, let alone basketball players. If you know his backstory, I would definitely recommend watching the movie Rise. I watched it with my wife and daughter, and they both really loved it. Just a true underdog story. Really easy kid to root for, plays the right way, plays hard. The exceptionally rare player that's a MVP and plays like he's on a 10-day contract. All that being said, he put it out there, basically letting the Bucks know I'm not taking it for granted. Don't take me for granted. If you want to keep me around, make sure you do the right thing and put the right pieces around me. So I think we have to consider that this is a interesting. I think the Bucks certainly didn't love hearing this. If you're a Bucks fan, you have to be nervous. And if you're Knicks fans, you have to be intrigued. He's one of the best players in the world. Having him on your team immediately vaults you to, championship, if not contender status, favorite status. So listen, we're a long ways away. Kind of the one thing the one kernel of fact that we have here is that in mid-September, I think September 22nd is the date. I'm not sure. It's late September, mid-September. There's a date at which the Bucks can offer Giannis a 3-year max extension. I think it's around $120 million. That would make him one of the highest paid players in the NBA. He had said in this interview, I will not sign this summer.
Yes.
Basically the money doesn't make sense. Something along those lines. We'll take a look again next summer. Again, they have him under contract for 2 more seasons before he has a player option. But right now, I would have said, this is something we even hinted at on the pod, going back weeks, going back months. Maybe there was like a 15% chance Giannis would become an unrestricted free agent when it's first possible in July of 2025. You got to bump that number up now. Do you want to bump it up to 50%? Do you want to bump it up to 20%, 25%, 60%, whatever that number is? Make no mistake. Giannis has put the team on notice, and all of a sudden, the 23-24 season for Milwaukee becomes a very, very important season.
Yeah, I mean, it is essentially a championship or bust season for the Milwaukee Bucks coming up because Giannis putting it out here that he wants to win, that winning a championship in 2021 was the best feeling in the world, and that's not something he wants to feel just once. And like he said, he said about wanting to be a player like Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, Kobe Bryant, guys that have played on one team for their entire career. But he says he's not going to put that ahead of an opportunity somewhere else that may be better to win a championship. I mean, all the kind of innuendo that Joel Embiid was putting out there in that comments, Mark Maverick Carter. There is no innuendo in these comments to the New York Times. He's saying it very clear that I'm going to win a championship. If it is not here, it will be somewhere else. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how realistic I thought it was until I heard this interview, but I probably felt like there was a better chance than maybe most, only because of the construction of the Bucks roster. It's a little wonky because you have so many of these players that are their star players that are at very advanced ages. I mean, you just signed Chris Middleton to a long-term deal, just re-signed Brook Lopez, just signed Drew Holiday. I mean, those are guys all well north of 30 years old, guys that are not entering the prime of their careers. This is not a team that has these great young assets that they've been, building up and developing to then take over and become stars when these guys eventually have to either step away or they have to move these guys. Like it really is like this very short window for this team to win. And once that window closes, it's closed for good. And I don't really see a clear way for the Bucks to rebound and say, okay, we're going to pivot this way. And now we're a championship contender. I've said it a bunch on this show that I wonder if the Bucks take a step back this year because of, seeing how the regular season didn't mean much for them when they got the number 1 seed and still lost in the first round of the playoffs. But also, like, is it worth it for them to have to play through an 82-game grind, knowing that they have guys who are not just also older, but also we've seen injury prone. I mean, Chris Middleton's been in that lineup for 2 years now. Drew Holiday is a guy who's been injured a lot throughout his career. Brook Lopez is a guy who's been injured a lot throughout his career. So, yeah, I think it's becoming more realistic. I think it's not something Giannis wanted, but I think he's seeing what I see. He sees a roster that is very good, but it's like if it doesn't happen soon, what is the next step? And I think that's where the comments of, is everybody, it was kind of weird when we say sacrificing time away from their family. I mean, I don't know really what to make of that. I'm sure I would assume the Bucks are taking the time to work the phones to make every move possible. But I think what he means by that, though, is that are we leaving every stone unturned in terms of trying to make this team a sustainable winner? Because right now it kind of looks like the Bucks kind of working on autopilot.
Yeah, and the other thing in terms of bringing in talent, they've traded away their 2024, their 2026 in swaps. Yep. The Knicks own their 25 pick. They traded their 27 pick to the Pelicans. So I believe they can trade one future first rounder due to the stipend rule. Possible, I guess they could go 28 and 30, although they traded 27. So probably the 2029 first rounder is the only pick they can trade. They have just 2 second rounders left they can trade. Remember, they gave away a bunch of them. I believe it was 4 for Jay Crowder at the deadline last season. So that's another. You only have so much capital with which to bring in new talent. When you mentioned the aging roster, they don't have young guys that they're that teams are really going crazy for. So it's not like they could trade at the deadline if the team's kind of floating above, only 10 games above 500, not living up to expectations, trying to adjust to a new coach. They can bring in a fusion of new talent, trade for one of the top guys that happens to be on the trade block. So that's another reason why, if you're a Bucks fan, you got to be concerned. Not only is the team is built to win now, so that's a good thing.
That is a positive. They're not a bad team. They're a team that can win next year.
By no means. If they're not the favorites to win the title this year, you can't pick 2 or 3 other teams. And we've talked about the East is definitely up for grabs. Boston going through kind of a bit of a, some question marks. They traded away their toughest heart of the team in Marcus Smart. KP's dealing with some injuries. Philadelphia's a mess right now. So it's not like there's, the upper echelon teams tend to be out west in terms of Phoenix and Nuggets. And the Bucks are probably only that tier 1 team in the East. So make no mistake, the Bucks should be positive. They have every reason to feel positive about this season, going very well, competing for a championship, winning a championship, etc. But as we know, Middleton hasn't been the picture of health in the last few years. Brook Lopez is 35 years old. Drew Holiday's, a few years past 30. He's talked about retiring in a year or 2. So again, even if it's not successful this year, it's hard for Giannis. It will be hard for the Bucks to sell Giannis on a vision of the future in which, once Middleton and Lopez are wiped out, we have all these draft picks, all these young guys coming in to replenish the talent, because that's just not the case.
Yeah, Chris Middleton just turned 32. Drew Holiday is turning 33, or he just turned 33 in June. I mean, those ages would scare me. And especially with Middleton, given the recent health issues he's had. Drew Holiday is a guy that, hasn't played more than 70 games since 2018. So, again, I think that's what Giannis is looking at and saying, hey, like, I don't necessarily see a team that, again, is a sustainable winner, so we better win now. Because essentially, if he signs that extension, he's signing the rest of his prime to the Milwaukee Bucks being able to rebuild this thing. And he says multiple times in the interview that I'm not about this rebuilding. Like, that is not part of the equation for me and where I'm at in my career. But essentially, that is what they're going to have to do eventually when these guys end up, phasing out of becoming star players perspective, because this is a Knicks podcast, matching them up with the Lakers when it comes to destinations, because those are the 2 that Mark Stein illustrates. The Lakers and Knicks are presumed to be franchises that Giannis will be interested in. Those are the words that Stein uses. Why do you think, though, that is the case? And how do the Knicks, in your eyes, stack up with the Lakers?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're a middle of the mid-market, small market team, it's incredibly frustrating to hear. It's not surprising, but it's big cities, New York, LA. Giannis, to his credit, has been a terrific teammate and employee of the Bucks organization since the day he was drafted, and they took a chance on him, and rightfully so. They've been rewarded a million times fold. But yeah, it wouldn't shock anybody if you spend some time kind of in that lower market, paying him playing in front of not necessarily the biggest crowds, the most boisterous arenas, even though, credit to Milwaukee, they have a dedicated, loyal fan base. It's not like the Garden. It's not like the Staples Center or Crypto, whatever they're calling it now.
Yeah.
It's just that those big markets, those big cities have a different feel to them. And Giannis has played enough. He's a man of the world. He's traveled enough to, London, Paris, and he's spent time in Madrid and major big cities to know that there's an appeal there. So it's not surprising that he'd want to, kind of change things up and go about things. And also knowing for a fact that, Dolan's not going to ever blush at spending quadruple billions in luxury tax money to surround Giannis with the best players. And same for the Bus family out in LA. If you have a player like Giannis, you do what it takes to surround him. So, this is the issues that small market teams run into all the time. But in the NBA, if you draft correctly, we've seen, the Denver coming off a championship. Milwaukee won a championship with Giannis. So it's not as though, certainly the Knicks have more losses than any team this millennium.
Yeah.
So there's no guarantee that just because you're a big city, but this is one of those situations where being in a big city could potentially help the Knicks, and the New York franchise.
And look, I mean, we've been down this road for now. I guess when was the summer of 2010 or 2011? Whatever that was. That was what, 14 years ago, whatever, 12 years ago. We've been down this road now for more than a decade. When it comes to this guy's gonna finally make it over to New York.
Right.
It really, maybe I'm gonna be jinxing us again. It really feels like something of consequence is going to happen next summer. We've seen too many people pointing to next summer as Knicks being major players when it comes to the star market. Again, not knowing exactly what star is going to spring loose. We spent most of this summer talking about Joel Embiid for a good reason. The Sixers look like they're on the verge of blowing up, and Embiid again made those comments to Maverick Carter. But now you got Giannis Antetokounmpo potentially springing loose and him making comments, and the Knicks are once again mentioned. And there was a time where, regardless of the big market and regardless of what New York had to offer, the Knicks just were not going to be major players for big name free agents or stars that became available. There weren't big time players when Dwight Howard went out of Orlando. They weren't big time players for a lot of guys. I mean, the famous LaMarcus Aldridge pursuit that ended up not happening at all because he didn't want to play center or whatever the situation was. So we've seen the Knicks go down this road where they're expected, and don't even mention on KD and Kyrie and stuff, but we've gone down this road where Knicks ended up really not being players significantly in these negotiations, where now it just feels like next summer something is going to happen. The question I have, though, is like, from the Knicks perspective, like, what are you trading for a Giannis Antetokounmpo? I mean, there's no draft pick I'm not trading. Every draft pick is gone, and I have no problem with it. You're trading every draft pick, trading every swap, and it is what it is. Is there any possibility you can keep Brunson in a trade with the Bucks where you keep him out of it and you're able to trade basically everything else?
Yeah, I think Brunson's the one untouchable, because I don't envision Milwaukee. It's would they like Jalen Brunson? 100%, but next summer he'll be a year closer to free agency, so he's going to be due a massive contract. If he wants to sign an extension to stay in New York, that's a possibility. He'll probably want more in free agent. I mean, listen, Fred VanVleet just got $40 million. If you don't think Jalen Brunson can get 40 plus $45 million annually, you're not paying attention to the landscape of the league. Do the Bucks at that point, if you trade Giannis, obviously you trade Lopez, you trade Middleton, you got the whole thing. Do they want 1 year of Jalen Brunson and then have to pay him, a $200 million contract? You would think probably not. Depending on what other assets they can get for those other guys, maybe they feel they can be a mid-tier contender, or they don't want to go the full rebuild route, which wouldn't make a lot of sense to anybody. So I think if you're the Knicks, you say, listen, Brunson's off the table. Whatever else you want, you can take, within reason. We can't give you IQ and Grimes and every draft pick and RJ Barrett, but take 2 and 3 and then 3 of the 4 draft, etc. We can work something out. But yeah, and that's the thing. That's why it's crazy to feel like that something more, there's a little bit more reason to be optimistic. Yes, we've, Lucy's held the football and Charlie Brown's, tried to kick it time and time again. In New York, Knicks fans know that feeling of the gut punch of seeing LeBron go to South Beach after announcing it in Connecticut, et cetera. We don't have to go through all that. We know it. There's reasons to be more optimistic this time. Not foolishly optimistic, not overly optimistic, not confident. But okay, there's some going on. Knicks have as much draft capital as quality draft capital. Let me rephrase that. The combination of draft capital and young good players on team-friendly contracts as any team in the NBA. Bleacher Report just earlier this week, I think it was Eric Pincus, put out a list of like the teams with the most draft capital. Knicks ranked third. That obviously did include guys like Grimes, IQ, Barrett, McBride, Rokas Jokovitis, who's playing well in FIBA World Cup. So there's pieces that the Knicks can put together that would make any team, that could compete with any team. And if the player says he wants to be there. And I think that's why it's so important, next summer specifically, and EJ mentioned that next season is incredibly important for the Bucks. And you might ask, well, why? Because the Bucks have him under contract for 2 more years. So even if they struggle this season, they have until next season before he become a free agent. That's where, if you're Milwaukee, things get very, very dicey, because the only thing worse than losing the face of your franchise and something you've built the entire franchise around in Giannis Antetokounmpo is losing him for nothing. So if you have even a slightest inclination, and you think Giannis would be honest enough to tell him, listen, I'm probably going to leave at the end of next year, it would be really difficult to go into a season if he doesn't extension next to lose Giannis for nothing, when you could theoretically trade him and replenish and really rebuild your entire franchise, and with draft picks and young players and just become an exciting young team, opposed to letting Giannis leave and then you're completely gutted. So that's why it's going to be so interesting what happens this season and what Giannis tells the Bucks in June, July next year.
Yeah, I mean, we now know the great players really never hit free agency. That's not really a thing anymore. These guys don't wait up until, all right, I'm just going to play out my contract. And these teams don't wait up to the fact that, you're going to play out your contract and then you're going to bounce on us. No, that's not happening. So these guys that just say, I want to be traded. And because they have that year of leverage, essentially say, look, I have 1 year left in my deal. They could kind of maneuver where they want to go. They're not in a position where, now look, some of these guys that we've talked about plenty on this podcast have 3-4 years left in their deal. They still find a way to get to where they want to go. But that's what I think what Dame Lillard's trying to do right now, essentially. But when you have that year left, it gets, as Tommy said, it gets very dicey, and it puts the Knicks in a position of strength. And someone's gonna take the plunge. Someone. I know for Knicks fans, they've heard this and they've probably been beaten down so much, but there's just no way, given the way the team's put together, the assets that the Knicks have compiled, the trades that they didn't make. I mean, think about like the fact that they didn't make the Donovan Mitchell trade because the price was too high. That's another thing too. Like, people really sometimes like, I'm not, look, the Knicks haven't necessarily earned a lot of, benefit of the doubt at all. But like, people do like look at things that happen and just think like the surface level, oh, Knicks blew it. It was a blunder. Like, there's a reason why the Knicks were saying, hey, we cannot afford to trade 3 or 4 unprotected first round picks of our own in a Donovan Mitchell trade, knowing that it capped what they could do in the future. And we say, well, what is the future look like? This is what it looks like. It looks like Joel Embiid telling Maverick Carter, I want to win somewhere. I may want to win somewhere else. It's Giannis Antetokounmpo saying, I'm not signing an extension until they build a champion. This is that other thing. That is why they don't make the first move. That is why they don't take a plunge even years ago for a CJ McCollum when he became available. Like, this is what they're building towards. So the Knicks are willing to make moves that make sense for them. But if it's going to essentially take them out of the running for that absolute crown jewel, the crown jewel players of the NBA, they're not willing to do it. And even someone like Donovan Mitchell, as great as he is, he's not on that level, which is why they held firm on a certain price. And I think I'm starting to feel optimistic the Knicks will eventually find the fruits of their labor next summer, because it just sounds like everyone's saying that next summer is going to be the one. Last thing quickly before I move on, Giannis or Embiid? If you had to choose one guy to add to this Knicks team, who would it be?
I go Giannis. A little bit younger, less injury prone. I feel more confident going forward, proven that he can produce in the postseason. Embiid has had his struggles, hasn't got past the second round. We know about the when Giannis got to the finals, the 50-point was 50-17 and 5 blocks, just insane numbers in Game 6 to win a championship. 17 of 19 from the free throw line in that game, I believe. So one of the best games played by any player in a big spot in the last 5-10 years or so. That was that Giannis game. He can dominate on both ends of the floor. His competitiveness, he's going to stay in shape. He's going to, and he's just an easy guy to root for. Just again, everything you'd love about, the story for him to come to New York would be a godsend for the franchise.
I agree. I would go with Giannis of all of the things you mentioned. Less injury prone, more of a proven winner, proven champion. There's a part of me that looks at Embiid's ability to shoot the ball and wonders if he stays healthy, will he age a little better? And I think it's a fair question.
Yep.
But I think Giannis is a better player right now. So I think that's why I would lean toward Giannis Antetokounmpo, a guy who I actually, would have voted for MVP. Not this season, but the season prior when people thought Embiid should have won. And Jokic got it. That's how great Giannis has been. And he had another great season this year that kind of got overshadowed by the Embiid Jokic conversation. So let's move on here and let's talk about Canada. Moving on in the FIBA World Cup after another impressive outing from RJ Barrett. After he had a miserable game against France to start off the tournament, Barrett bounced back with 2 stellar performances and blowout wins for the Canadians. On Tuesday, Barrett scored 22 points on 9 of 16 shooting, 4 for 6 from 3-point range as Canada defeated Latvia 101-75. Barrett also added 17 points in 20 minutes in Canada's win over Lebanon over the weekend. Meanwhile, it was a perfect day for Brunson as he went 5 for 5 with 13 points in 18 minutes as Team USA routed Greece over the weekend. Josh Hart also provided a spark. He had 6 points and 5 assists and a game-high 11 rebounds. And there was a very interesting quote from Steve Kerr quoting someone else about Josh Hart that I thought was worthwhile. And forgive me, I forgot to record the audio to play it for you. But he said, quote, "Josh is just a winner. People ask, what position does he play? He plays winner. I don't know what position he plays. At one point, Spo turned to me and said, some people get 50-50 balls. He gets 30-70 balls. I think a lot of Knicks fans seeing how much it kind of, and I get chills still reading that quote. And I think a lot of Knicks fans are very excited to hear Kerr and Spoelstra kind of describe Hart in that way. Before we get to Barrett, what did you make of how 2 guys who are multiple-time NBA championship coaches described Josh Hart in that post-game press conference?
I love that 30-70 ball. To me, that's like just a perfect encapsulation of, you can try to use, plus minus. Sometimes that even, obviously traditional counting stats don't tell the story when it comes to Josh Hart. And even plus minus, even though I believe he leads the Team USA in plus minus. One thing, I don't, maybe we'll mention Fournier, who's scored, but France has struggled. Fournier is averaging like 22 points per game, but his team's been outscored by 44 points in the 2 games that France played. Whereas Hart, 5 points, 11, he'll just do a little bit enough, sprinkle in some points, rebounds, and but he's a winner. It really, really, you get the sense of it when you see him playing for somebody else, like when he's making an impact in Portland, the Knicks should probably get him. You and I were both in favor of that trade, but it's a different thing when you see him up close. And I think that's what Spo and Kerr, that have the guys around him that have praised him, you get a different sense for when he's on your team. Because, as we've talked about a million times, he's the guy you pick up at the beginning of a run and you stay on the court all day long. And a lot of it's because those loose balls, that are typically classified as 50-50 because it's a coin flip. Either side can get them somehow, some way. Some guys just have a nose for the ball. It's an old cliche, but I think that sums up Josh Hart perfectly.
Yeah, and in some ways, like this, these quotes kind of answer the question of why the Knicks okay with not having a backup power forward entering the season, because they have Josh Hart who plays winner. Forget about his position. As long as he's out there, they're going to find a way to get it done. So. I thought that even Steve Kerr's comments about position playing, like who cares? This guy is on the court. He's going to do whatever it takes to win. And in turn, your team is going to win with him out there. So, and Jalen Brunson spoke highly of him as well. Like, Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to see Hart play with these other players, and he's not going to be looking for his shot. He's not necessarily going to be looking to dominate the game offensively, but yet, as you mentioned, he finds a way to present a positive impact, present a positive plus minus, and when he's out there, Team USA usually thrives, especially on the defensive end, especially in terms of their compete level seems to just increase when he steps on the floor. So another impressive showing by Josh Hart, and it was really great to see how again championship head coaches viewed Hart as a winner. And then on Jalen Brunson, 5 for 5 affair. It's so funny. Like I just feel like Brunson has these great games, and then like the commentary is just silent about should he start, where is Tyrese Halliburton, how much time should he be getting so many minutes? Like it's just the guy goes 5 for 5. I hear nothing about Jalen Brunson. But then again, one game, Halliburton plays great. And it's like, oh, Halliburton's the greatest. Halliburton should have been starting. He's better than Jalen Brunson. I don't hear any of that whenever Jalen Brunson has a great game. But Jalen Brunson continuing to thrive for Team USA as expected. And then on RJ Barrett, how impressed have you been with him? I mean, after a ghastly 1 for 11 showing, which I would say alerted Knicks fans, but honestly didn't alert me because I've just seen these kind of games from RJ Barrett where he just can't make any shots, and then all of a sudden next 2-3 games he's on fire, and that's essentially the Canadian RJ experience that they've gotten early on. How impressed have you been with him, and how you've seen his play improve so far?
Yeah, you got to be super impressed. One of the things that I found interesting is looks like Drew Hanlon, his trainers tweaked his shot a little bit. Looks like his feet are a little bit closer together. His landing, his jump is not jumping quite as high, trying to keep his base a little bit more compact. His shot looks a little bit quicker, less of a dip in his motion, so that could increase the quickness of a shot, which should help. But again, we've seen these positive streaks from Barrett, only to regress a little bit. The couple of things I do like is he looks like he's looking a little bit once he gets into the paint, looking to get a couple feet in the paint and then dish. One criticism I have for RJ is in games that I've seen, we've seen that a little bit where when he's involved offensively, he's more engaged on the defensive end. I've seen that for Team Canada as well. Like for instance, the Lebanon game, he was really good in the first half, and then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was playing. Just watching that, Shai Gilgeous, I don't think there are too many players in the NBA that have a higher upside than. I mean, we're going to be talking about him as one of the 5 best players in the NBA. So
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I said it on this show with you, but like I was like, he might be the best perimeter scorer in the league. Like he's that good.
He's crazy. He's crazy good. But so he basically took over in the second half, and RJ seemed to like take a secondary role. But that's the thing. Like when RJ gets engaged, and I think it's a good reminder for Tibbs. It's something that we've talked about. Maybe utilize him more with that second unit, especially if Josh Hart's playing power forward. Get him some more opportunities with that second unit, so you have Brunson and Randall kind of holding down the fort and being the focal points of the offense. For the first 7 minutes of a game, let RJ stay in, and then play with that second unit a little bit, and he could potentially be kind of more of that focal point, because we've seen him in times past. When he's given an opportunity to do so, he can score the ball. Looks in tremendous shape. One of the reasons that that it was kind of assumed and hinted at that he struggled at the start of last season, 22-23, was because the contract situation, he hadn't signed the contract extension, so maybe he wasn't working out, maybe he's limiting, his time in the gym, his time.
Right, don't want to get hurt. Yeah.
Didn't want to get hurt. It seemed like he came in a little bit sluggish, a little bit, not quite firing at 100%. Maybe this is a good sign that I'll come into camp. We'll see if he, wears down a little bit, come May, June. Hopefully the Knicks are still playing around then. But maybe he comes into camp and really starts off on fire mid-October, November, gets off to a better start than we've seen.
Yeah, it's so interesting with RJ Barrett, and I promise Knicks fans, I'm not trying to trade him when I say this, because I think I'm the one less likely to trade than Tommy on the show. But it just feels like Barrett looks great. I don't think anybody can deny. I mean, he looks great. He looked great in the exhibition run. Again, the one terrible game against France where you couldn't buy a shot. But besides that, he's been great pretty much this whole time. But dare I say, I almost get Obi Toppin vibes in the sense that, like, will I ever see the best of RJ Barrett in this iteration of the Knicks, knowing how much they run their team through Randall, knowing how much they are and will and should run their team through Jalen Brunson? Like, is there any way to unlock another level to RJ Barrett? Like, he's averaging 19 to 20 points a game in the last 2 years. Like, is it even possible for him to average 22, 23 points with the way the Knicks play? Like, one of the things I saw watching this game with Team Canada, that, some of this, you're playing against teams that are more turnover prone, maybe a little less athletic, but like, the way Canada gets out and runs. And I mean, RJ's been a terror. He's had some highlight reel dunks in transition, which we've seen a little bit with the Knicks, but like the Knicks don't get out and run. Like, they don't play a style of defense that causes a lot of turnovers, in part because they want to protect the rim. And the Knicks have had a good defense, so I'm not really criticizing Tibbs with that. But it's the style of play, so you don't get as many runouts there. You have two isolation players, so you kind of end up walking the ball up a lot. Like, the Knicks don't play to RJ's strengths a lot of regards. Earlier in the exhibition round, they asked him, like, what's the difference between this and how he plays in the NBA? He says, the paint is wide open. The Knicks famously play, two bigs that can't shoot in Hartenstein and Robinson. So he's never gonna have those wide open paints as long as this is the team he's playing with. So I say that to say that as great as this has been, and it has been great, I think that, as you mentioned, past, RJ can start in his role, that might be good enough. I just wonder, like, maybe there is an all-star hidden in there that we just won't ever see because of the guys that are playing essentially ahead of him in the pecking order of the scorers on the squad.
You mentioned, can he take his game to the next level? He averaged 19.9 or, basically 20 points last season. He gets to 22 or 23. Issue was he scored 20 points inefficiently. The best version of RJ for the Knicks is probably him averaging 16, but shooting closer to 50% from the floor than 21 and shooting 42% from the floor. Those really only take the shots that are open to him. Focus on knocking down open three-pointers and camping out in the corner, spreading the floor a little bit more. It's obviously not what he wants to hear. It's not what his dad wants to hear. It's not what Drew Hanlon wants to hear. And again, to your point, that's not knocking RJ. If you take RJ Barrett and the Knicks release him tomorrow and he signed with the Washington Wizards, he could average 24 points a game for the Wizards next season. Absolutely. And put up a ton of points, score, average 6-7 rebounds, get some assists in there, knock down a bunch of threes, probably not in an efficient manner if he had the complete and just the absolute green light, and probably wouldn't lead to a lot of wins. That's kind of the, that's where it gets tricky, for RJ, for the Knicks, trade talk, etc., because this might not be the ideal situation for him. The ideal situation for the Knicks in that spot is a true 3-and-D guy that's content to lock up the other team's best perimeter player and camp out and take 4 or 5 uncontested three-pointers, per half, something like that.
And then the question becomes as well, like, because again, nobody questions Brunson's role in the offense, but should it mean that Julius Randle's role in the offense should be a little less than it's been? Like, he's the absolute guy for the Knicks. He's their leading scorer. And look, he's done it at a fairly efficient, very effective level in the regular season. But we've seen in the postseason that he essentially is nothing. He's zero. It's zero impact, maybe a negative impact, really, for the team. Whereas RJ Barrett in the postseason was a positive. After the first 2 games against Cleveland, where he struggled, he was pretty much great the rest of the way up until Game 6 against Miami. But like I said, I go back to the team in the creation of it and the head coach. Do I think that there's a chance Tibbs says, you know what, Randle, we need you if we're going to win? Maybe you dip down to being more of the third option here, and we can play a little more open space, get RJ a little more opportunities, and you kind of be more of a 19, 20 point scorer. I would never foresee that happening as long as Randle and Tibbs are together on this team. There's just no way that's happening. I mean, maybe in a situation where Giannis comes over, maybe then Ryan Randle takes that third option role, but I don't see any way where that ever happens with the team the way it's currently constructed. And that to me, beyond even RJ in terms of like whether or not he could win as a 24-point scorer, just like his overall development as like a player, like he might not ever reach his full potential, like with the Knicks the way they did. Like maybe he can eventually be a 24-point scorer who can win games. Like I don't think he's that today, but maybe he can get to that point. Does he ever get there playing with the Knicks? I have my doubts about it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, one, he's just 23, which is crazy. We forget how young he is. And the other point is, it's really important to note how well he played during that 10-game stretch from, game 3 of the Cleveland series.
Outstanding.
played incredibly well. So he basically, said that you guys think I can't play effectively and win games. Go back and watch the tape.
Exactly.
The other thing to note is, and going into this upcoming season, the one basically change in the Knicks roster was getting rid of Obi and bringing in DiVincenzo. So if anything, DiVincenzo is going to take more touches, more shots away from RJ.
Right.
Whereas Obi, played exclusively with the second unit, played exclusively power forward, and would
He
camp
had
out.
no plays drawn for him ever.
No plays drawn from ever. DiVincenzo is going to take more shots. He's going to get more assists. He's going to have a much higher usage rate than Obi Toppin did. So where does that slice of the usage pie come from? Does it come from RJ? Does it come from Hart? Does it come from Brunson? Does it come from IQ? Probably, ideally, a little bit of each. But nonetheless, that's another reason why it's probably unrealistic to expect RJ to score more again. But that doesn't necessarily mean he becomes less valuable or plays worse.
Exactly. And we mentioned quickly before we move on, him playing more of the bench unit, which is something that Tibbs, to his credit, he really gave RJ that chance. Like he takes him out early, and RJ comes in late first quarter or beginning of second quarter with that second unit. And there were times last season on this podcast during the regular season I said that RJ was not doing a good enough job leading that bench unit. It wasn't until Hart came in that bench unit finally kind of took off. Like RJ needs to make the most of that time. Like we all agree that he's not going to be a number 2 or number 1 option when he's playing with the starters, but he is number 1 option, no question, when he comes off the bench with that second unit in the second quarter. Like he needs to kill other teams' second units. And I think in terms of making a big jump for RJ, that's what I want to see. I want to see him really take charge. And when he's out there, he's playing like a star when he's playing with, the Harts and the IQs of the world. I don't want him being relegated to kind of letting these games sometimes get away when that unit came out there because he wasn't being aggressive enough or not efficient enough. So those would be things I'll be looking at for next season. So could the Knicks days at 33rd Street and 7th Avenue be numbered? That is a little bit of a question because Madison Square Garden lost its bid to permanently operate above Penn Station on Monday. 2 city council committees voted to give MSG just a 5-year operating permit. That is just half the length of its current 10-year operating permit, and is half of what a planning committee had required or recommended for Madison Square Garden moving forward. So now if this vote that happened with the 2 council committees gets approved by the full council, it will be the shortest permit the Garden has received in 50 years. Now, the deal demands that the Garden be required to make improvements for pedestrians that could bring the aging facility more in line with the redesign of Penn Station. If you've been around Penn Station, a lot of construction has been going on. They try to remake that thing, and is not the prettiest of sights at all. And Madison Square Garden, being the entertainment hub that it is, doesn't necessarily help with speeding up those renovations. Now, according to Cranes New York, a move for MSG actually seems to be becoming increasingly unlikely with this deal, though. So it adds, quote, to the likelihood that any brand new train hall will need to be built below the hulking arena, a fact that the city and state policymakers have come to accept, even as some transit and community advocates continue to argue that the Garden must relocate for Penn to reach its full potential. So they did have to make this deal, and there were some concessions, but it seems like this talked about move of Madison Square Garden away from 33rd and 7th isn't imminent. It may not even be likely at this point, despite this only 5-year operating permit that's been allowed by the city council as of right now. So you asked, how will this impact Dolan? Well, according to the New York Times, the brevity of the new permit could theoretically strengthen the city and state's hand in negotiations with Dolan by creating an uncertain business environment for the arena's owners who might be loath to invest serious money into the Garden that they have no guarantee of memorializing over a lengthier time frame. So essentially, this is kind of like a barrel being held over James Dolan moving forward, saying, hey, if you don't want to play ball, you only got a certain amount of years left, and these other people who want to invest in businesses in and around Madison Square Garden may not want to if you only got 5 years. So this seems to be, Tommy, like almost like a last-ditch effort, and maybe the one that will work to finally get against the Garden and Penn Station to kind of play ball with each other so that they can kind of work this thing out. But are you still confident that MSG will stay where it's at? Because as I said, they're transiting community advocates who still believe that the Garden has to move in order for this to work, and some that say they won't still give up this fight.
Yeah, listen, I'd be dishonest if I said I knew the inner workings and the political power structure. I'll just say this. Dolan's a very powerful figure in New York City and New York City politics. The Dolan name carries a lot of weight because they are incredibly wealthy. Yes, they have, let's just say, they have some people that have a vested interest in keeping him happy and keeping Dolan,
Right.
the family happy. I would bet on the Knicks getting their way essentially because they have so much money to throw around. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, we know that typically trumps what's better for the public good and for the common New Yorker is who benefits financially. That being said, it does seem like obviously New York is pushing back. The powers that be are pushing back against Dolan, trying to get the best deal on their behalf, which is what they should be doing. And as we know, Dolan is he's not a guy that takes threats idly. He's not someone who deals with what he perceives as disrespect in a cavalier manner. He's the type of guy, if you're going to push, if you're going to threaten, you better be prepared to follow through on that stuff because Dolan has that type of FU money where he can take a loss, he can take a beating, and it's not really going to impact his bottom line. I mean, we see this quite frequently with extremely wealthy individuals, including a someone who spent $44 billion on a tremendously successful app and then renamed it and did everything in his power to destroy it by going from Twitter to X and whatever else Musk has done to just demolish the value of this thing. But again, he's lost so much money when you have billions, literally $50 billion to begin with. Losing a few billion here or there is like you and I forget losing $20 in the wash. So for that reason, but again, so. Do I think MSG is going to stay there? Yes. I think it makes sense for all parties involved to kind of keep the status quo, centrally located, good for the Garden. You don't have to worry about Dolan defaulting on loans or, a risky proposition coming in. There was that talk of Amazon moving into Long Island City. Everyone got excited and then that fell through.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bird in the hand beats two in the bush, that all those type of cliches. The devil is better than the devil you don't. Dolan has been good to the city. He's certainly benefited from tax breaks and other things, in a massive way. But he's also not been afraid to spend that money. He hasn't hoarded that money. He's reinvested in the product, the Rangers, the Knicks. So it's something we'll keep an eye on. It sounds like obviously there's a 5-year window now, and there'll be a lot of threats and back and forth for the time being. We'll probably just have to wait and see until we get closer to that kind of make or break deadline.
Yeah, and the Garden released a statement saying, "We are disappointed. The committees have done a grave disservice to New Yorkers today in a short-sighted move that will further contribute to the erosion of the city. That's true now and will be true 5 years from now." So Dolan, who wanted, again, they pushed for years and months for a permanent lease to operate at that location. And here they're only getting 5 years. Again, they got some concessions that would have been less if they actually got the 10-year thing that was approved by the city. The city planning committee had these very, I guess, for lack of a better term, draconian things that the Garden would have had to do to get the 10-year lease. They scaled that back, but only gave them the 5 years. So this, to me, just feels like something that's going to continue to be batted back and forth. What I will say is I hope the Garden doesn't have to move. And just from just a basketball standpoint, because I'm a basketball podcaster. I was a news writer, but I'm not a news writer right now. To me, there are really no classic venues in the NBA anymore. We lost the Spectrum, we lost the Great Western Forum, and I'm watching Winning Time and seeing the old Forum. On the show Winning Time with the Lakers of the 80s. Like, we don't really have like any Wrigley Fields or Fenway Parks of the NBA. That's not really a thing.
Boston Garden gone.
Yeah, Boston Garden's gone. They had the TD Bank Garden, which is not the same Boston Garden. Like, we don't have those famous classic basketball arenas anymore. Like, they don't exist really. The Garden is the only one. The Garden did have a major renovation about 10 years ago. That was $1 billion, which is a big reason why Dolan doesn't want to move. Like, he just spent $1 billion updating his current arena. He's not trying to tear it down and then build another, $3-4 billion arena somewhere else. Like, he has the money, but that's not something he's trying to spend. Right. So that's the biggest thing of why he does not want to move at all. But at the same time, just again, from a basketball standpoint, like, coming to the Garden is special because there's no place like it in the NBA. Now, whatever new arena Knicks would have if they did move would be called Madison Square Garden, still, almost certainly. Yeah. But like it would still lose a little bit of luster and a little bit of shine, knowing that this is not the arena that's been there for 40, 50 years. Remember, this is the second Madison Square Garden. There was an original Madison Square Garden that was by Madison Square Park, which obviously would make sense. But this is an arena where so many classic events have happened. We've seen the Knicks, win a championship. We've seen the Knicks move on in the playoffs. We've seen so many great performances from opposing teams, so many Big East tournament events, so many St. John's games,
Ali Frazier fights,
boxing matches, Ali Frazier. Like, it's like indoor arenas, and it makes sense. I mean, it's indoor, so like you can't have a crumbling infrastructure. So it makes sense that we don't have a lot of those buildings anymore. But Madison Square Garden, in many ways, is like the last of its kind. So if they lost this spot and they had to build a brand new arena somewhere else, that would be a shame.
Agreed. So yeah, again, it's in everyone's best interest to keep it the way it is. So we'll see if cooler heads basically prevail.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Look, as someone who also, I know you traveling from Long Island, I'm traveling from Queens. Like, Penn Station is not in good condition, so that also needs to be fixed. As a New Yorker, like, I don't want to make it sound like all I care about is basketball. That Penn State situation is a problem. Like, I moved away from New York, came back, and started taking, the subway and taking Long Island Railroad again. And the first year I was here in 2019, I could not believe that it was basically it was like destruction almost. Like, I know they were constructing a lot of things, and it's turned the corner a little bit, but like, I mean, it is not in good condition, and it feels like this construction is being prolonged so long, and there's no question a part of that, a big reason why that's because they got 40,000-30,000 people on top of the thing going to see the Rangers, or going to see the Knicks, or going to see Billy Joel or Drake or whoever is performing at the Garden that night. So yeah, it will be something to continue to follow, but something has to be fixed on both ends. They got to find a way to do this Penn Station thing more in a quicker, more effective way, and then at the same time, they got to keep the Garden where it is. They got to find a way to make this thing work. So hopefully they'll be able to do that. But that'll be a good place to leave it today. So I want to thank you for checking out this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. Again, New York Knicks podcast and Audacy WFAN original. This is a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Be sure to hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time you drop. Also, be sure to rate and review the show. You like the podcast, make sure you give us a rating and review on whatever streaming service you're listening to. And as always, you can check us on YouTube as well. The full videos of the podcast and shorts from the podcast get posted on the WFAN channel. So make sure you check us out over there. That'll do it for now. Thank you guys again so much for checking us out. Tommy, quickly, let people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. Thank you guys again so much for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.